Hi, I'm Walden Bello. We've just come out of the 6th Ministerial of the World Trade Organization. We went to Hong Kong to try to derail the ministerial. Unfortunately, the big trading superpowers were able to impose a bad deal on the developing countries. However, as in Cancun and as in Seattle, there were a great many instances of people's resistance. However, it's not over yet. We still have the opportunity to prevent the Doha round of the World Trade Organization from being concluded this year in 2006. But first, let me tell you what happened in Hong Kong. The opening of the ministerial on December 13 was greeted by a number of protests. And in the morning, for instance, we had a very colorful fluvial parade staged by 100 fisher folk from all over the world in Victoria Harbor. This was followed by a massive march from Victoria Park to the convention center. This march had people from a variety of sectors, including women, farmers, workers, migrants, fisherfolk, activists, students, and professionals. And later on in the afternoon, we had this very spirited action on the part of Korean farmers, about 50 of whom jumped into the cold waters of Victoria Harbor and tried to swim to the convention center. This just gives you an indication of the kind of actions, the militance of the protests, and the spirit in which the people greeted with protest the opening of the WTO ministerial. Every day during the ministerial, there was a variety of protests inside and outside the Hong Kong Convention Center. Inside, there were skits, singing and creative actions. Outside, there were marches, rallies, street painting, concerts, forums, workshops, and candlelight vigils. In all these actions, the message was clear. The people have suffered enough and did not want another bad deal. Even the ordinary people of Hong Kong had started to understand the message and express their sympathy by yelling, Kong Yi Sai Mao, or protest the WTO. On the second to the last day of the ministerial, things were heating up inside and outside the convention center. Inside, the big trading superpowers were exerting all efforts to break the alliance of developing countries. Through the bribe called Aid for Trade, the United States and the European Union were arm-twisting the least developed countries into accepting an extremely bad deal. The green room discussions went through late into the night, mounting the pressure on developing countries to give in. Outside, things were equally dramatic. Thousands of protesters led by farmers marched from the Victoria Park to the Hong Kong Convention Center. Halfway there, the protesters were blocked from the officially approved route by hundreds of riot police armed to the teeth. The police tried to break the protest. However, the protesters were able to go through the police lines and run to the street right outside the Hong Kong Convention Center. The march was so close to the center that the activists inside the center who were doing a candlelight vigil were able to come out to join the march. Outside, people chanted, made speeches, and sang songs, while some of the protesters tried repeatedly to break through the police lines. Then suddenly, without warning, the police threw gas canisters, engulfing the entire march and the local Hong Kong people watching the protest with potent tear gas. After the crowds were dispersed by this very, very strong tear gas, the police began to move in, and in the next few hours, by 2 o'clock in the morning, they had arrested about 900 protesters. Now, the WTO Secretariat and the representatives of the big trading powers have all been saying that the countries of the South got a development deal. However, there was nothing about development in this deal. First of all, in agriculture, although export subsidies will be eliminated by 2013, other forms of export supports will continue to subsidize the agricultural goods being dumped on developing countries. Even without export subsidies, the European Union will be able to subsidize its exports to the tune of 55 billion euros after 2013. When it comes to NAMA, it's also a bad deal. Why? Because there is something called the Swiss formula that is going to be the formula for the computation of tariff reductions. And what the Swiss formula does is that it reduces high tariffs proportionally more than low tariffs. And developing countries tend to maintain higher tariffs than the developed countries. NAMA, therefore, or the Swiss formula agreed upon in Hong Kong, will penalize developing countries. When it comes to services, again, we have a very bad deal, because in the past, the services negotiations were based on a very flexible request-offer process. What the services agreement that was arrived at in Hong Kong does is that it introduces what is called the plurilateral approach, which means that any set of countries can make demands for services to be opened up from another set of countries, and the latter will have to enter into negotiations. So there is now a mandatory element for developing countries to enter into negotiations. What this does then is that it erodes the very flexible approach that protected developing countries earlier. And finally, the development package. There is something called aid for trade. This aid for trade will be mainly loans given to developing countries to make their laws WTO consistent, as they call it. So this is really going to get them even indebted. Then there is also the fact that the developed countries have been saying that they're giving duty-free access to the goods of the least developed countries. Well, let me tell you, that is also a lie, because there are still exemptions. Only 97% of the tariff lines, for instance, of the United States will be opened up, but the remaining 3 to 4% really are lines that are for commodities that are being exported by the least developed countries. Also, in this development package, there is something called the implementation of the integrated framework. Now, what this means really is nothing more than the comprehensive implementation of structural adjustment in the least developed countries, which includes radical deregulation, radical trade liberalization, and radical privatization. Structural adjustment has been a major cause of the poverty of developing countries, and the so-called integrated framework that is part of the development package is in fact nothing more than a reinforcement of structural adjustment. So this is why there's really nothing about development in this development package. The battle is not over yet. 2006 will be a very critical year. In 2006, the Battle of Hong Kong will move to Geneva, to your national capitals, and to many other sites throughout the world. In 2006, the WTO will need to reconvene in several meetings, such as general councils and mini-ministerials, in order to move the negotiations forward and conclude the misnamed Doha Development Round by 2006. There are several things we can do to prevent this round from being concluded. First, we have to spread the analysis and information that what we got in Hong Kong was a bad deal, that we can still do something about it. Second, we should heighten the pressure in our capitals. Now more than ever, national coalitions and campaigns have a crucial and critical role to play. We should look for our trade negotiators and bring them to account for signing us on to a bad deal. We can use national and local fora and platforms to challenge the commitments made by the negotiators and to block the implementation of this deal. The third thing we can do is to heighten the pressure in Geneva. We should intervene in the process of negotiations in Geneva and prevent this bad deal started in Hong Kong from being completed. And we should continue to work together, form and build alliances on all levels, national, regional, and international. Join us. We need to stop this process. We need to stop this bad deal from being imposed on the developing world and the rest of us.
Buyas na stateside, ubas na may cyanide, at salamat na lang sa gobyernong halang.